first I want to thank you for having me. I want to give some attribution to my colleagues. There were some other folks that helped me pull this together because, well, unfortunately, I'm not an expert in everything, albeit I try. So Dean Bankson, you may recognize his name. He's a long-term colleague. Ina Komishka from the Center for Social Research, and Frayne Olson from the Department of Ag Business and Applied Economics. I guess I should have figured out how to run this. There we go. I'm going to talk a little bit beyond just energy, okay? And talk a little bit about demographics because it's been a pretty significant shift in North Dakota in the last decade. The economy has gone boom and has now settled out. And also, we're going to talk about the oil and gas industry, but I do want to mention that the oil and gas industry is just part of a larger energy industry. I'm not going to touch on our growing wind economy, wind sector, or the lignite coal industry and the mining and conversion, or the electricity generation and conversion that goes with it. And again, I can't talk about North Dakota without talking about agriculture. Well, my slide didn't come through exactly right. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. I like this slide just for the dramatic effect. I mean, really, if you stop and look at it, we've just been chugging along since the 1940s. And at the turn of the century and in the last 10 years, the economy's just gone. The population has literally just exploded in North Dakota. When you take a look at since, oops, lost my spot here, where we've just seen dramatic growth in the last 10 years. Here's a little look at some more recent population forecasts. As you can see along the trend line, we've got a population now of an all-time high of 672,000. The dotted line that goes up to 891 by 2029, that's some work for some population projections we did back in 2015. I think those projections are a little hot. Again, we were doing those projections right at the peak of the boom when things were going the strongest in the oil and gas energy. I ran a little trend line on it from 2013 out to 2029. And I think we're going to see more stable, steady population growth throughout the state. I know there's some folks that are saying we can hit 800,000 in the next 10 years, but I think that's a little optimistic, you know. But anyway, again, that's a good look at what's transpired in the last few years, and it is pretty dramatic given the history of North Dakota. Now, here's a really interesting slide. We've seen growth overall, but I tell you what, population change is not consistent throughout the state. And there's two takeaways from this slide. One is you see out in the purple out in the west, and those are our 4 key oil and gas producing counties. It's just gone boom out there. McKenzie County has increased by 114%. Watford City and the county has gone from a population of about 6,000 to about 13,000 in less than 10 years. So you imagine the amount of stress that's been on the infrastructure out there has been absolutely incredible. The other takeaway is that we're really seeing other areas of the state where we're not seeing population growth. Those yellow areas are predominant agriculture areas, our small rural communities. We heard quite a bit about that this morning, but we're seeing the trends of the past continue. The other areas of growth are in our urban areas, Grand Forks, Bismarck, Dickinson, Minot, perhaps not so much Grand Forks. But those economies are much more diversified, much more stable, and are growing pretty consistently. There's another big takeaway. We have gotten much younger. We're the 4th youngest state in the country. And that, again, is a dramatic shift in trends over the course of the last few decades. So you can see the median age at 38 nationally and down to 35 in North Dakota. Now that's going to have some substantial impacts on how our population grows in the future. Future growth is going to be driven by natural births, much less so than the in-migration that really sparked the big boom that we had in the last few years. Again, kind of the tale of 2 states. Once again, the median age is not consistent. We've got much younger out in the west, where we've got average ages in the low 30s. In our urban counties, we're much younger, and then we go back into the central parts of the state where agriculture is the key driver, where we've got sparsely populated areas. The population is much older. So again, tale of 2 states. Now, I'm going to skip over some stuff because we're going to stay on time here. I don't want to be the one to bust the schedule wide open. Here's a little slide that again kind of illustrates that how we've gotten much younger. You look over on the right, what we've got in terms of population growth in children. It's moving quite a baby boom. In fact, there was just an article in the Fargo Forum day before yesterday that talked about how out in Dickinson, historically the number of births was about 300 per year. Last couple of years, they've been on track for over 700. So we're gonna have some real issues in terms of being able to build the schools and infrastructure to try and accommodate that population growth. Again, here's just another little slide that talks about future change in population. You can see on the right, our population growth, I think, is gonna be slow and steady in those growing counties. It's gonna be driven by the fact that we've got a much younger population. Here's another really big takeaway. Now, North Dakota still is not very diverse, okay? We still only have a population of color of about 16%, and that's up from 11% in 2010. But I think you really have to take a look at the percentage change to put it into perspective. North Dakota's seen a 64% increase in the population of color compared to 16% for the United States. So again, that's a really, really big change, even though we're still, not very diverse. So overall with the demographics, and I strike on this because the change has been so dramatic when you look at the historic conditions in North Dakota. That dramatic population growth was fueled by a booming economy, and that was largely fueled by the oil and gas industry. And I'm going to talk about that specifically in a little bit. Again, future growth is going to be the result of births, and the characteristics have changed. We're younger and more diverse. I'm just going to touch briefly on our gross state product. And again, I throw this up there just to try and illustrate how the oil and gas industry and high commodity prices in the last 5 years really fueled a really booming economy. When you see a 75% increase in your GDP since 2000, it kind of makes you sit up and take notice. Now again, we also know that isn't sustainable. We took a pretty good crash when the oil and gas market went downhill in 2014. Unfortunately, that coincided when ag commodity markets went down as well. So the North Dakota economy is still driven by commodities, oil and gas and agriculture. However, things have stabilized, especially in the oil and gas industry. I'm going to skip to the oil and gas. Now, I'm going to stop here on one thing in terms of, we've talked a lot about workforce. Even though we've got this booming economy, we've also have a serious workforce issue. We have 15,000 job openings in the state. The Governor Burgum likes to say that's the city of Jamestown. Now, the real key part of this is that the state North Dakota Job Services tracks the number of active resumes to job openings, and statewide we've got 0.29 active resumes for every job opening. So like everybody else, we've got a workforce issue. All right, now we'll go to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the oil and gas industry in North Dakota. Again, I throw these graphs up just for effect. Things are clipping right along, and then we get the hockey stick. In October, we set a record of 15,000 wells and 1.5 million barrels per day. The production is concentrated in those 4 core areas. And one of the key things to take away on our oil and gas industry is things have really stabilized. Prices went down, but the industry has gotten so much more efficient. They've gotten efficiencies in technology in terms of drilling, technologies in terms of infrastructure. We have roads and pipelines. We've got the drilling rigs are much more efficient. When things were at the height of the boom in 2014, there were over 200 rigs out there. Now there's 56. And the drilling time is decreased by about half. I have one other talking point on here. Oh, the other really big issue here is that the recovery rates have improved dramatically. Early on, maybe they were getting 3 to 5% of recoverable oil. By about 2014, we were maybe getting 7 to 8. Currently, we're getting 13 to 15%. So all of these things are really making the oil and gas industry much more stable, and I would argue much more susceptible to severe price shocks. Here's an example of some of the efficiencies. We've got clear improvements in infrastructure. Now, this is a slide that I stole from Justin Kringstead at the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. And the two lines to look at are the blue and the purple. So if you look back in October 10 at the left-hand side, pretty much everything that we were producing was going out by pipeline. Okay, well, as the production ratcheted up, that capacity was quickly overtaken. And then we started pulling out oil using rail. And the rail is the purple. So you can see at the height in 13 and 14, most of it was going out by rail, very little by pipeline. As you can see to the right-hand side in October 19, that's been, that has been inversed. And we're now have made dramatic progress in filling in pipeline infrastructure. Again, I throw this chart in just for dramatic effect in terms of the amount of oil and gas that we're producing. That 15 billion or 1.5 billion gallons a day is significant. Now, some people seem to think that we've got more capacity. These aren't my predictions, but the head of North Dakota Mineral Resources predicts that North Dakota will hit 2 million barrels in the next 10 years. I think that's maybe a little optimistic, but you know, we didn't think we'd get to 1.5 million either. Oil and spot prices, again, this just shows that, you know, it's a commodity. Prices are going to go up and down. Now, one thing about this is that the prices seem to have stabilized. We've gone up a little bit more, but with all of the efficiencies, I think the oil and gas industry is much less susceptible to huge price shocks. Now, again, these aren't my estimates, but Lynn Helms, North Dakota head of Mineral Resources, is suggesting that the break-even points in our core counties can be as low as $12 per barrel. So, again, I'm not going to take credit for the numbers. So, but that's what's being put out there. A couple of other interesting things. You know, these price shocks have given us some real fiscal fits in North Dakota. You know, which reminds us that we're still an economy that is dominated by commodities. Oil and gas is a commodity just like corn and wheat. Prices go up and prices go down. I see I forgot to fill in the blank there. An example of our fiscal problems, NDSU's seen a 23% cut in its budget over the last 2 biennium. Now on the flip side of it, we've got a little thing called the Legacy Fund in North Dakota that's funded by a portion of the extraction taxes. It's got a balance of $6.5 billion. And so there's a pretty interesting conversation going on about how do we spend it. Here's another issue. I know that this comes up frequently, the flaring issue out in the oil patch. We're doing much better than we were previously. For example, in 2011, we were flaring 36% of the natural gas. And as you can see by just the slide, we're doing much better. Okay, now we're only flaring about 17% of it. But that flaring is still a result of the fact that we don't have all the infrastructure in place that we need. Now, the current goal is to capture about 88%, and ultimately the goal that's been set by 2020 is to capture 91%. I don't think we're going to make the 2020 goal, but the industry continues to work on that. And so again, that's a function of infrastructure. So again, I think the key takeaway, the industry stabilized, the technology changes and the infrastructure improvements are just phenomenal. Now, there's still a long way until this is played out. You know, some people say that, you know, we're going to end up with 45, 50, maybe even 60,000 wells over a period of 20, 30, or 40 years. And again, I like to stay out of the prediction business because the only thing for sure is that I'll be wrong. So, activity is in the 4 counties, and the break-even points have improved dramatically. Now, I'm getting short on time, but I do have to stop and touch on agriculture just briefly. Troubles with agriculture started in 2018, and you have to speak about agriculture in North Dakota because it's every bit as important to the state as the oil and gas industry. So the trouble started in 2018 with poor prices and then the start of the trade wars. But through 2018, producers managed to deposit cash flow. The word that I got from my contacts is they said that the Donald dollars helped keep everybody straight. Now, that's not my term, and I'm not passing any judgment on it. But those direct payments managed to keep cash flows positive in 2018. But in 2019, the troubles have mounted tremendously. We've got poor prices. The tariffs have hurt terribly. The tariffs are disproportionately impacting North Dakota, and the weather was horrible. Just a couple of little tidbits about how horrible the weather was. 60% of the corn in North Dakota is still in the field. And that's gonna cause troubles in the spring because that crop's gotta come off before you can put another one on. Not to mention that we had a snowstorm in October and got about 2 feet of snow between Christmas and New Year's. Soybeans, disproportionately affected. 75% of the soybeans in North Dakota go to the Pacific Northwest. 95% of the soybeans in the Pacific Northwest go to China. So this really is a big deal for North Dakota. Some of our other crops were hurt too. Wheat, we had disease problems, so producers are getting discounts. Here's a terrible one, potatoes. A lot of them had to get left on the ground. There's a potential shortage for potatoes for French fries. Okay? Not good. All right, sugar beets. We had lots of sugar beets left in the ground. And now the unharvested sugar beets and potatoes cause less of a problem in the spring. Then go till those up and plant over it. So, I guess this is just, I'm going to say one thing about this is that Dr. Frayne Olson would quote, the soybean supply chain has shifted and we're living through another major transition in agriculture in North Dakota. Okay? So this is a big deal. Now, there's going to be producers that are going to go under. That's without a doubt. Now, Frayne has also indicated that there may be some opportunity for generational transfer. The conditions are perhaps putting some downward pressure, maybe not on sale prices, but at least leases. But what's going to transpire in agriculture in North Dakota in the next few years? If I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be standing right here. But this is a big, big thing for the state. So I guess the key points is, we've really seen some substantial changes in North Dakota. Our population has increased dramatically. We've got a much younger population. Take away with oil and gas, it's stabilized. The infrastructure's caught up. Now we're going to need to continue to invest in infrastructure, both for the industry and in terms of schools. That's going to be a big one. Williston right now is struggling to get a bond passed to build a new school. They need a supermajority of 60%. Last vote, they got 58. So again, the price collapse in agriculture, same time as oil and gas, also caused us some significant fiscal issues. And we've got substantial strain in the ag industry. So I guess the big takeaway that I would take on this slide is go to the last 2 or 3 points. The oil and gas industry is stabilized. It's going to continue to be a major driver in our economy in North Dakota. We've got serious concerns in agriculture, and I think both of these things point out that economic diversification, especially in North Dakota, is as important as ever. And unfortunately, I think we're relearning some of the lessons that we learned in the 1970s and the 1980s. So with that, I will step aside, and I think I only went over a little bit.
I have just 7 things that I want you to take away that you need to know about the Michigan Upper Peninsula's labor market. And the first one is that the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is an important part of Michigan, both culturally and economically. For those of you who are interested in history, you know that Michigan acquired the Upper Peninsula in 1837 when it was admitted in the Union, and that was to settle the war between Michigan and Ohio over the Toledo Strip. It represents about 29% of Michigan's land. That's about 16,000 square miles, and 9,000 of them are rich in natural resources. We're talking about timber, we're talking about copper, iron, nickel, and we are still exploring. So there are many other minerals to be discovered. Despite the size, only 3% of the population, the population of UP represents only 3% of Michigan population. That's about 300,000 in 2018. So that brings me to the next fact about the labor market of the UP, is that its population has been declining and is forecast to continue to decline at least in the next 45 years. So dramatic, my colleagues have been using this curve to dramatically show what's happening. The population of the UP peaked in 1975 and has been declining since then. It's forecast to continue to decline. By 2045, we think that it's going to be around 280,000. So that's about 20,000 below the level that we have today. Out migration, domestic out migration is the number one reason for this. We know, for those of you who work with population data, natural growth has been declining in many parts of, not just in Michigan, but in many parts of the nation, because just declining fertility rates, so declining birth rates, and in UP especially, increasing death rates as the population becoming much older, and which I'm going to show in a minute. So 60%, this is very interesting, 60% of the UP population reside in only 4 counties out of 15 that comprise the area. And those are Marquette, Chippewa, Houghton, and Delta. And all 4 of them have one common trait, is that they have a university or a college in it. There are only 2 counties, Houghton and Marquette, whose median age of the population is below the state's average. And that's, again, Houghton and Marquette. That's where you find in Houghton, that's where you have Michigan Tech. And in Marquette, that's where you have Northern Michigan University. So that brings a constant flow of young person in those 2 areas. I actually had a pyramid that was that will show this dramatically, but because of time, I was advised to delete it. So this brings me to the third fact about the labor market of UP, is that this population decline is also one factor that explains the lower levels of labor force and employment in the area. So labor force has now returned, for example, to the pre-recession levels in the UP. And that's in contrast with the state. The state, after the recession, sees a steady increase in the labor force. UP has continually declined. We see an increase of labor force in the UP between 2003 and 2006. And this is because the state closed several prisons in the Lower Peninsula. And workers were allowed to relocate, and most of them end up in the UP. But since then, the labor force has been declining. They accelerated during the recession and hasn't recovered at all. So compared to 2000, for example, we are still 12.4% below the level of 2000. Unemployment rates, the pattern is almost the same as the states. The UP in normal times tend to have a little bit higher unemployment rates, but within the margin of errors. During the recession, UP actually had lower unemployment rates just because it depends less on the automotive industry that we know Michigan depends on a lot. Employment, same trend. By 2018, the annual average is about 18,500 below 2,000. We have not returned to the pre-recession levels in the UP. We stabilized, that's the good news. The employment has stabilized at, since 2011 at about 130,000. and that's about 14,000 below 2007 levels. So a natural question then to actually is, with this downtrend in employment, are there any industries that are growing? And which industries are declining? And so the next fact is that more than half, so we're talking about 10 out of 19 industry sectors in the UP are still losing jobs. Okay? And nearly 80% of UP's jobs are concentrated in these 6 industry groups. Public administration, so we're talking about local, federal, state, plus every tribe-owned business is counted in public administration, is the largest employer in UP, about 26%. The one thing that is interesting is that in the UP, the sector of healthcare and social assistance, which in the state and in many other places around the nation has been growing even during the Great Recession, in the UP that sector is declining. And mostly because of somebody mentioned about the social assistance that has been declining, especially in rural areas with the closure of residential residential nursing. That is happening a lot in UP. And that brings us to the 5th fact about the UP labor force, is about mining, which is our focus industry. And mining is a very important part of the UP's economy, as we're going to see in a minute. So if we're talking about jobs, mining is really small. It represents only 1.3% of payroll jobs in the UP. But if you look at the state, that's about a quarter of mining jobs in the whole state. Now, if you look at, and I think I'm going to point to this, if you look at mining jobs, they have been declining over the past 2 decades, right? And the decline is usually, it coincides with the closure of mines. So mines have a limited life of production. And when they get to the end of the production, that life, they have to show that they still have enough to keep producing. Otherwise, they close. And when they close, of course, the pull factors go away and employment goes away. So if you look at between 2000 and 2018, mining jobs in UP dropped by 35%, from 2,200 to about 1,500. All other private industries combined, they still dropped by just 13%. That's how dramatic it is. You see some upswing here between 2011 and 2014. That's because the state approved the start of mining of nickel in the UP. And that actually has a lot of effect, as we're going to see in the next few slides. I wanted to look at the demographics of mining workers, and they are older, they are predominantly male, and they are in a prime working age than compared to other private industries. So, for example, other private industries combined, the jobs are equally distributed across genders, with a little bit of majority of male, 51%. In mining, 93% are male, right? The educational attainment is the same. 45% have a high school diploma or less. In other private industries, 43%. So it's the same distribution. That's why I'm not even representing it here. But despite the low levels of employment and declining, the wages in the mining industry in UP has been increasing dramatically. Between 2018 all other private sectors combined, the wages increased by only $300, and we're talking about nominal values. In mining, increased by $1,000 over this period. The GDP, the contribution to the GDP is just breathtaking. And it has been rising over the past 2 decades. So the GDP, for example, rose to about 1.13 billion in 2011. And it's now, so that's, today, the mining is the 4th contributor to the UP GDP after real estate and manufacturing. So this is another really interesting chart. If you look at the distribution of mining GDP across the state, over a third of it is produced in only one county of the UP, and that's Marquette. That's a little over $700,000 in 2018. It's followed by Wayne, sorry. Okay. How did I go? It's followed by Wayne in Southeast Michigan at 14%. And another fact is that about 4 counties of Michigan provide 62% of mining GDP, and 2 of them are in the UP. That's Marquette and Schoolcraft. And then you have 2, which is the Wayne and Monroe in Southeast Michigan. Actually, that's where they mine salt. I just learned that because the data was showing me that, and I got curious. Apparently, we mine salt under the city of Detroit. We didn't know that. The 6th fact is that almost all occupational groups in mining pay above not only regional average, but also state average. The regional average in 2008 was about $16.59. The average wage for the state was $18.02, and only 2 groups of occupations pay lower than this in the UP, in the mining UP. Construction and extraction is the largest occupational group in mining. It provides about a third of mining jobs. And it provides about 40% of annual openings, mostly to replace workers that are leaving the industry, the area. The largest detailed occupations are about roustabouts, first line construction, supervisors, etc., etc. So certainly in mining, but also more generally, employment in the UP is expected to be flat at best. These are projections to 2026. And in the UP, jobs are actually projected to decline by 1.5%. That's about minus 1,800 by 2026. The only group that is projected to grow is jobs that require more than a bachelor's degree or higher. And even then, the growth is about 8 times lower than what is showing statewide. So in a few sentences. So despite a decline in population and labor force, the UP's wealth in natural resources such as copper, iron, nickel, and others to be discovered represent a large contribution to the area and state GDP. And the contribution has been rising over the past 2 decades while employment has been declining, which suggests some sort of increasing productivity in the mining industry in the UP. With that, I'll take your questions.
Well, thank you to both of you for those presentations. We have a shortened time frame for questions, so I'd like to turn it over to the audience pretty quickly. But I do have kind of one common theme that struck me from your 2 presentations, is that, and particularly Leo in your slides, I think it's interesting that even though we've seen an increase in new mining operations in the UP in the last few years, we've seen a decline in mining employment in spite of that. And Nancy, this is true also in the Bakken, where even though the oil output has stabilized and actually increased in the last few years, mining employment in the industry is off of its peak. And that presents challenges for how you think about the future development, in particular when you think about population projections. And I just kind of wonder how you think about the role of continued technological development in these fields and the long-term growth prospects.
Well, I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. Yeah, we did lose a lot of jobs in the oil patch when the prices crashed in 2014, about 15,000. And we would have thought that we would have seen some really terrible negative repercussions from losing 15,000 jobs that quickly. But what had happened is that the people that held those jobs just packed up their RVs and moved out of their crew camps and went back home. So, well, we did have a little bit of contraction. We didn't have negative repercussions. And I think what we've seen is a stabilization. We'll continue to see some efficiencies, but I don't think you're going to see those kinds of big contractions in terms of labor force. For starters, we've got pipelines and we aren't trucking everything anymore. So I think what we saw in the past in terms of losing that many jobs in that short period of time was just a function of the one-time anomaly where you had something that just went boom. And then the prices forced everything to come back into place. And I think that we'll see continued job increases out there, despite efficiencies maybe in the drilling side of it, because long-term for every, I think you need a couple people for every well drilled. So as we add wells, we'll need to add that workforce that will do the maintenance long-term.
Well, in the UP, I think the mining industry is really adapting to the declining population. So they are putting more technology, not only because of the declining population, yes, that's one factor, but also because they are being required to do more than just the traditional mining. They have to really use technology to show that they're going to have minimal impact to the environment. And so when you look in this is the fellow from Montana, is it? Yes, I was advertising about going to Montana. If you want to really see the state of the art of mining, you need to come and visit the nickel mining. It's really state of the art. And so they have to show to the state that they're now going to impact. And so they are bringing in a lot of technology, hiring very few people, but really knowledgeable people, and they're being paid a lot and producing more, so it's increasing productivity.
Question over here.
Hi, Nancy.
Yes.
You said that in your state, your population's getting more diverse. What's the driving force behind that? Is it low cost of living? Is it something else?
I would just say I haven't taken a deep dive into it, but I think we're just basically seeing in-migration because we largely still have a pretty healthy economy. So we've got people that are coming in from other places that are more diverse, that are coming in and taking jobs. We're also seeing increase in population in our Native American populations. So I think it's just simply a function of that, despite the fact we've got kind of the tale of two states, we've got a pretty healthy economy in North Dakota right now. Again, we've got some fiscal issues, But, you know, we've got more jobs and we've got people to fill them. So I think that's what's driving it right there.
Question over here.
Hi Nancy, as your neighbor to the south, we felt some secondary effects of your guys' boom. So I guess a question I would have, if there's any major price shock, you know, in oil, would you expect that you would have a boom again, or do you think with the infrastructure in place, you know, that's not very likely?
Well, I think if we see prices go up, yeah, you'll see exploration expand past beyond that core producing area, because if it's productive, you're gonna pull it out, and it's just about a sure thing when you put a hole in the ground that you're gonna get something out. In terms of seeing that kind of boom again, I don't think we're gonna see that again. When this all transpired, you have to remember that was in a part of the state that had been declining for decades. I mean, there were no roads, there were no schools, there were no houses, there was no anything. So then when you have this huge influx, yeah, it just explodes. And I think there's so much of that that's in place now. We've got bypasses in Williston and Watford City, and we've got you know, refining capacity. We've got homes that have been built. So I don't think we're going to see a repeat of that. That's a one-time deal that you know, was kind of a perfect storm in my opinion.
So when Leo was up there, it made me think, you know, we haven't heard anything today about hemp and cannabis. So wondering, you know, how do you think that will affect the Michigan, even in the UP, and also just hemp production in general in this region?
I don't know if I am qualified to discuss that at this stage. It's you know, it has been approved. There was a proposal that the people of Michigan approved to make marijuana recreational, and there's still a lot of discussion going on about how they're going to regulate it. So it hasn't really actually. You know, I teach a class in public policy and program evaluation at Michigan State. And one of the projects that I want to give to the students is to evaluate the impact of that on different things of Michigan. So maybe, you know, ask me the same question in June, I'll have some answer off the records.
I actually thought you might be prepared to ask about industrial hemp as an agricultural product, which I know is of interest in North Dakota. I don't know, Nancy, if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't think I had. I'm just not familiar where it's at. I didn't do my homework on that question. So, okay.
Do you have any other questions from? Oh, there's one back here.
I'm Mark Finstead. I live in northwestern Minnesota, and question for Leo. We visit the UP quite often, snowmobiling, motorcycling. It's a great recreation area. I'm wondering if the state could focus a little bit more on recreational development to help employment in that area, because it's a wonderful place to visit.
Yes, and you know, maybe when we go to, is it Missoula? In Montana next year to talk about this, right? We may focus on tourism, because tourism is a huge industry in the UP, and in all seasons. So they are able to switch from a summer recreation activity to winter. The thing is, when you look at the tourism industry, is greatly affected to what, it depends on what is happening in the Lower Peninsula. Because when the jobs are down in the Lower Peninsula and people are not going up, you know, people from Minnesota and Wisconsin go there, but yeah, many Michiganders from the Lower Peninsula go there. I go there maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And so when the jobs are bad in the Lower Peninsula, it affects the tourism. But that's something that we can talk about in the next other conferences.
I think we have time
Next
for-
time I'm going to put in a shameless plug for tourism in North Dakota. I'm not going to get left out.
I think we have time for one more question.
Alan Tomes from the University of Minnesota. Dr. Marimba, two questions if I might. I see some parallels between northern Minnesota mining and in Michigan, the Upper Peninsula. There's been a decline in employment and it's tougher economic times. Is the state of Michigan developed any specific programs to help or encourage mining in the Upper Peninsula?
Again, it's as a state employer, I'm not really required to talk about policies, but mining is an interesting industry because it affects the environment, and there are many groups that really don't like it. And so if you look at the approval of nickel mining, which we know is very important in the automotive electric batteries, right? So it's something that the big three really wanted to see happening. But it took a long time to approve because it really has a big impact on the environment. And these new groups are really making sure that if it's approved, it has minimal impact on in the environment. So it's not just the state policy, it's all these groups that, and I think it's a good thing that, yes, it's employing fewer people, but we see that it's paying more, and it's really making sure that the mines are really state of the art and are having a lower impact and very minimal impact on the environment.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you both for your presentations, and we're going to turn it over to my colleague Ron Wirtz to start our second panel, but if we could just thank them really quick.